So I've always been very interested in the science and religion discussion. Um, I guess what really draws me to it is the odd and often counterintuitive way that science emerged out of a religious worldview. Um, and to try to trace the history of human inquiry into the nature of the self and the nature of the world, the universe, uh, how it has um, emerged in the Judeo-Christian West for, I think, very specific cultural reasons. Um, it's no accident, in other words, that modernity and secularity and the sort of scientific materialism that guides our contemporary civilization. It's no surprise that it emerged out of a Christian background or a Christian tradition. Now that might sound strange, like how could that be? But as I said, it's counterintuitive, and you can read Christianity as a reaction against this sense that one may have in certain moods that this physical world, that this single life, is all that we have, and that all goods must exist in this life on earth. The whole Christian mythos concerns this idea that um, earth and the human will be redeemed, and that the fall will be reversed, and that sin will be overcome. Perfection will be attained by those who uh, accept the Savior into their hearts. Um, so that Christian mythos becomes scientific materialism in the sense that that sort of a modern worldview has focused entirely on the immanent, entirely on perfecting and making, in whatever sense, more enjoyable, more bearable, more pleasurable, more whole this life. Now, it's a question to what extent scientific materialism and the sort of free market capitalism that supported it and that it in turn supports epistemically. Um, it's a question as to whether we really are more whole as a result of this sort of enlightenment project to make life more reasonable, I suppose, at the end of the day, is what this is really all about. Um, Science is supposed to be based on reason and evidence, while religion was, and for those who still live within that sort of a pre-modern mindset, uh, well, it's based on faith rather than reason, and belief rather than evidence. Uh, but maybe this is too simple of a picture, and I think one would have to recharacterize what science is really all about, because of course evidence itself is an interesting concept when you take into consideration the way that paradigms uh, arise and overtake and are replaced by other paradigms in the course of scientific activity, such that what counted as evidence at one period no longer counts as evidence again um, in another. So while in William Paley's age, the apparent design of organic life counted as evidence for the existence of an all-powerful divine architect, that sort of claim of evidence no longer really holds um, anyone's attention in our day and age. Uh, we've become, in one sense, more a more practical-minded people today, and if we can't see it, we find no reason to believe it, and uh, in one way, we lead simpler lives today than those in the Middle Ages because we um, are without a need to secure transcendence. We seem able to live, perhaps with a little neuroses here and there, and with a general sense of having to try a little harder than we'd like to a lot of the time in life. Things just don't always go along by themselves. You're going to push, and um, but somehow modern secular people, atheists especially, you're able to derive value from your life, though you may not think it ultimately means anything. For me personally, I think there was a stage in my life where uh, the God idea and the God possibility, let's say, didn't seem that important to me, whether you said there was a God or not. Kind of, well, what does it really matter? How does it change your experience of life? That's what I was concerned with, and I'm still concerned with that. But I think the question of whether or not our worldview is to be, in some sense, theistic rather than atheistic. I think it's an important question, and I'm no longer willing to um, treat it as lightly as I may once have, in saying that in some context I would even call myself an atheist. Though that is still true. I mean, I take Buddha's teaching very seriously, that the question of whether or not there is a God is somewhat irrelevant to the question of whether or not there is a cure for suffering. But it all depends on what one is trying to accomplish, and so long as we're doing philosophy or theology or theosophy, perhaps, um, we can try to solve these metaphysical problems. When we're dealing with the existential fact of life, I'm a Buddhist. When we're dealing with the true nature of reality, I'm a bit of a theist, a panentheist certainly, and I guess with a Christian twang at the end, whatever that means. Actually, I'm not a Christian, but I do think that Christ has a role to play in more sense than one in the continuing, if there is to be a continuing evolution of the human species. And when I say in more senses than one that Christ has a role to play, I mean psychologically, philosophically, spiritually, and perhaps even physically, perhaps even to the extent that the universe is an evolving process, in the way that Teilhard de Chardin talked about the divinization of matter. Perhaps this impulse and this possibility that has been called Christ in the Judeo-Christian West, but could be called many other things. In Greek, logos; in English, the Word. Uh, Other traditions have different names for this solar principle of evolutionary intelligence. And I think intelligent design and neo-Darwinism are both more alike than different, and I would rather talk about intelligent evolution, um, which is something else entirely. Now, I only have 40 seconds remaining in this video, and I didn't even get to talk about wonder and this notion that religion or supernaturalism doesn't have a monopoly on wonder, and that science can generate this feeling and sense for the sublime as well. I wanted to talk about that, just to try to grok what it is that wonder means. If it doesn't mean God, then what does it mean about ourselves and about the universe? So I want to post another part 2 to you, Karen, to be serious, so look for that.